Casey Hudson and Ante Campbell here. And as we mentioned, trades might answer some questions, but it also brings us to the question of how does this going to have us re-engineer the draft approach for the Boston Celtics, which brings us to a little bit of a draft preview. We've had some great guests on last week to kind of give us perspective on if the Boston Celtics tried to make a jump, where that sweet spot would be somewhere around, 13, 14, 15. But it's also been mentioned that this is a really talented draft, so you really don't have to do any of this magicianing to get a quality player that would be NBA ready as of now. Ante, with the movement, with the Drew Holiday trade, with the conversations of the other pieces that the Boston Celtics can potentially move on from, how have you kind of reevaluated this upcoming draft?
I think it's kind of landing back to where I've always been. We need bigs.
Centers.
I think bigs are important for this draft. We talked about KP in the last segment, just how, losing him could, shape what this team is going to look like. I didn't even get into it, but I would love to see them trade KP to the Pelicans for Trey Murphy, which is a wing. So I know a lot of people are out here saying that the Warriors are interested, the Pelicans are interested. If somehow we can get Trey Murphy back in the deal, I'm not saying 1-to-1, but for KP, that would be a nice pick, but that still leaves us empty with the bigs. Assuming that Al Horford's going to say, hey, thanks, I'm going to go try
I'm tired.
Right, I'm going to go try to win this somewhere else. Assuming that Luke Cornett is going to say, hey, I was on a one-year prove-it deal. I had a great year. I'm going to go get paid now. Thank you very much, Boston, for the championship.
Yeah. That
leaves you with an Xavier Tillman, who we talked about, Neemias Queta, some bigs that the Celtics are, I wouldn't say super ecstatic about. You know what I mean? Nimi is a great player, and I think they do have high hopes for him, but not as high hopes to be their starting center. So if you're looking at a team that needs to figure out the big spot, I feel like there's some guys in this draft that could help them do that.
Yeah, that's true. And to add to some of the teams that KP is reportedly being shopped with, it's Brooklyn Nets, obviously, just because of the amount of pieces and draft picks and all the things that they can just break down and ship off. Los Angeles Lakers in need of a center. That conversation is starting to circulate.
I did see that the Lakers are out. Right before we got on. I did see that, they're kind of out. That was one report. It's just one, but
I almost made a dig saying that West Coast decisiveness, that checks out. The Detroit Pistons, young talent needing support. Utah Jazz interested in him previously. That could come back to the table. But you're right. And here's the other thing. With those great interviews that we had last week, with the list that is circulated, about 5 names have kind of stuck around for the Boston Celtics to potentially be looking at and eyeing for this NBA draft. 3 of the 5 being centers, unless this Boston Celtics team wants to add to the guard situation. So now, you mentioned the big guy, but would you lean in another direction, and for whom?
No. Honestly, no. Now that we have Simons here, I trust in their ability to build around him and Peyton Pritchard as their starting and backup point guard, with the Derek White obviously intermingling in some point guard duties for this team. And obviously Jaylen Brown's going to bring the ball up as well. So I'm kind of good on the whole guard situation, at least draft-wise, because they don't need projects. They need guys who are ready to help them win and play games right now.
Yeah.
A lot of people bring up, when you talk about at least guards or wings in this draft, with that 28th pick, they're talking about Noah Penda. And that was a name that I believe, Fran had me write down. He's like, hey, write this kid's name down, And
you added that for some reason, the French market right now is just super hot. So it lines up. Continue.
Yeah, so, and he's a 6'8", wing, tracks as a small forward guard, really in this draft. But the issues that I see with his game is that he can't create his own shot, which is, people talk about the playmaking. He's a great passer, but he's not a real, really able to put the ball on the deck and make things happen. He gets stripped a lot. He has turnovers doing that, so his handles aren't really there. I know JB has struggled with his handles, but, I'm not really into that for a young prospect right now who doesn't show me the upside that JB showed me as a prospect. Then he's not a great shooter. He's only made under a third of the threes that he's attempted throughout, so
that
he's
doesn't scream plug and play.
Right, he's under 33% from shooting, and then defensively, he's not that athletic. You know what I mean? Like he has a ability to switch, But when you're talking about athleticism, it's not really there. He doesn't even finish above the rim a lot of times on his drives to the basket. That makes me nervous for a guy this young. I'm kind of out on Noah Penda.
Yeah, well, it sounds like he's going to need a little bit more attention. And another question that we asked John Fanta was, how many of these players are going to be NBA ready when the draft is done? You get to your team, you get situated, because there are a handful of teams out there that need their NBA prospects to be ready to pivot into their roster almost immediately. And again, if we're not washing, which we're not here, then we need a guy who's going to plug and play. You can't be worried about him, and you can't be worried about multiple players new to your roster and their defensive ability. Again, you got to fit that systematically here for the Boston Celtics, in my personal opinion. So I'm with you on that. But if you're pivoting away from that name, is there another name that jumps off the board at you?
Yeah, it's one of those things of it's going to be a situation of who's available. I think at the end of the day, it might end up being somebody that we're not even paying attention to right now. Last year, no one was shouting for Baylor Shireman to be a Boston Celtic, and now he's shown flashes that he could be a really good draft pick for them. It could be one of those situations as well. I trust Brad Stevens wholly in this, in this era. But it's the names that keep coming up. Like you said, there's 5. I'm going to talk about 3 of the bigs: Maxime Reynaud, Ryan Kalkbrenner, and Danny Wolf. And it's really going to be who's available, depending on the draft, mock draft, the boards, whatever you look at. All 3 of them can kind of be around that 28 range.
Yes.
I haven't seen Danny Wolf get that far back. I've seen him as far back as 26, but that's the guy that I have been shouting the praises of, just because of his ability to put the ball on the deck, his ability to play as a cutter, be in space, and his ability to make shots off the dribble.
Right.
Which tracks for me that eventually he's going to become a great still shooter. The free throw numbers make you a little nervous about his touch, but I think this is a kid that can figure it out. Now, if you're talking about a more pro-ready, 2-day, kind of fit the need of what the Celtics need, it's Ryan Kalkbrenner. And the reason is he's older. I mean, by the time they play their first game, he's months away from being 24, He's a man. But, my issue with Ryan is, the three-point shooting hasn't been at volume. I've seen it in spurts a little bit here and there, but he hasn't shot it at a high clip. He's a great defender, but he can't switch. He's a great shot blocker. The rebounding numbers aren't where they should be at. Those 2 things make me nervous. If you're going to be a big in this system, the Celtics struggled when they were in drop coverage. They were the best when they were able to switch when KP was at his best. They could play him at the 5. Al Horford at his best, they play him at the 5, and they could switch 1 through 5 and say, hey, come at us. When Nemi came in, when Luke Cornett came in, the defense started to slouch a little bit, but the good thing about those 2 dudes is they rebound.
Right.
Can Ryan do that? That's a little nerve-wracking for me early in this progression. And then Reynaud from Stanford, I mean, this kid, he would probably be my second option if it's not Danny Wolf. I mean, he shot 45% on catch and shoot threes this year. And he's shooting 5 a game, So if I'm getting that kind of consistent production out of him in the NBA jersey, we're talking about 3 7-footers here. So you can, there, you know what I mean? These are 3 7-footers we're talking about. So defensively, they're going to be able to, do some things and block some shots and do other things that the guys my size wouldn't be able to do. So, having him here would be the best option. Also kind of a slow-footed, not really good in the switch, kind of a drop. Big, instead of being up there at the level of the screen, he has to fall back and kind of see everything in front of him. They're not going to be perfect. This is a 28th pick that we're talking about. Well, I was going to say,
because considering school, considering conference, considering where they went in their basketball career at college, sometimes I feel like it's hard to navigate how they're going to translate to the NBA, because we talk about Ryan now. What you mentioned is keying, because that's probably how he's going to fall down to a 28-32 spot for the Celtics to be able to pick up. But needing him to shoot more, needing to see more threes out of him, needing to see more rebounds out of him, if the system provides for it and asks for it and needs that, is the capability seem like it's there? Because sometimes it's hard to see it in their school programs.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. College basketball does not track well for what NBA basketball is going to look like. It gives you a glimpse, but that's why they do these workouts. That's why they pay attention to what these kids wear in high school, because that more mirrors.
You're going to have to bridge it.
Right, it more mirrors what the NBA game looks like. That's why a lot of these, these European products are coming in and doing well, because they've played professional basketball. With professional basketball is more alike, and it's not 1-to-1, but it's a lot closer than it is in the college game.
Yeah.
I think something that I do want to know before we get out of here is that, you know, with these picks, you know, financial situations do come into play. You know, with the 28th pick comes with some guaranteed money, and the Celtics don't need to be adding money to the books right now. You know, so when you're talking about a 32nd pick, I think they should trade out of it as a whole. You know, I don't think.
So you're definitely against them trying to trade up in any sense.
I mean, trading up, you know, financially, that's where it gets dicey, right? How much can they get under the second apron with this KP trade? If they do trade to Sam Hauser, those are going to come into play with this. But, you know, if they're not going to get super far under that bridge, you know, then I'm out on the trading up as a whole.
Yeah.
But they definitely, I feel like, should be trading out of the 32nd pick because they can get value for that for a guy that they might end up waiving, like Watson, like I was talking about earlier.
True. Good point, actually. Didn't think of the financial side of all of this, but they can save themselves, put a little bit of a cushion, and still grab a prospect. But look, the other reason prospects are important, the NBA draft is important, trades are important, it's to get you to a championship. So we're going to talk about some too early to tell potential champions for next year.